Free will. A much debated topic in the philosophy, religious community. One that I have put thought into myself. Is this all me or is it God? When are things my choice and when is it God tipping the scales? When even is that line drawn? Like, do we accredit the RNG happenings in life to God and the choices to ourselves? Or does God also sway those decisions? So considering this, is our current situation influenced by God or fully our own doing? But if both, how can that be possible? Hard questions that require much brain power from a human standpoint or may otherwise not even be answerable. But God is not the author of confusion, and the Lord grants wisdom. Nevertheless, this will be me attempting to put something together, unless God also has his hand in this, but who knows as of yet. I'd like to start at the current situation and the overall state of one's life, and go from there. So essentially working backwards. Is where we are now the spot God intends us to be in? One might immediately counter, no, if the situation is bad, then of course not. And to that, I would send him to Joseph or Job. Without skipping to the end, as I want to focus on the current situation, one would say that Joseph's time in the cistern wasn't God's plan when he was thrown in by his brothers, or his entire time in slavery, then later getting accused by Potiphar's wife to then being thrown into jail. Again, skipping ahead, one can say, sure, but that was all part of a plan. But then focusing on those time periods, one might say to themselves, what is going on? Why am I here? Like the case of Job. He was stripped of everything, and though we can see what is going on behind the scenes, he can't. And putting ourselves in his shoes when he lost everything down to his life, we would be in a state of much distress, just like he was. And here we can see good examples of the RNG, things being in control by God despite them seeming like random happenings. Oh, but that can be explained by one being refined by God. Just see Romans 5:3, Job 23:10, Proverbs 17:3, Psalm 66:10, or especially Isaiah 48:10. So then wouldn't that mean it was God's decision? Sure, trials are, but you have to be careful not to mix our own failures with God's doing. One cannot mess up their own lives and blame God. That goes back to the question. When is it our failures versus God's doing, or otherwise Him tipping the scales? Probably the greatest example that comes to mind is Pharaoh and how God hardened his heart. Another one is with Abimelech, king of Gerar, though this one is a happy ending. These men are just going about their day, but God had direct influence over their actions. Another example that ties in is when Jesus is on the cross and he tells God not to hold the sins of those people against them because they didn't know what they were doing. How is that possible? And does that also add another factor to all this? Like Satan or just blindness? In regards to Satan's influence, we are told that we fight not against flesh and blood, but the rulers and principalities of this world. Yet, there's an interesting twist, like demonic possession, and even the time when Satan entered Judas. Though possession seems cut and dry, what about the gray area of influence? Well, maybe then God controls the final/major outcomes, like Proverbs 16:9 says, "A man's heart deviseth his ways, but the Lord directeth his steps." Besides, it's just that influence. So what about when someone does mess up to a large degree? Why does God not block that for everyone, or at the least Christians? He only seemed to block it for that king, but not any of the others when Abraham was being deceitful. And wouldn't influence still count as being a part of something, even though they're not directly doing the deed? Hardening Pharaoh's heart seems pretty drastic. Perhaps that was the route that God was fine with letting it go down as part of the grand design. Romans 9:17-23 would apply here. And Pharaoh still had control over his actions despite his heart being hardened. He just ultimately chose not to fight his heart. Ah, yes, the passage that seems to sum all this up, which also ties nicely with the ending of Job, with God showing up and letting Job, and us by proxy, see just how little he knew and how much God oversaw. It's a bittersweet thing to swallow, that answer, but it makes sense despite how much it hurts. God will do what he wants, I suppose, but he does it out of his infinite knowledge and for the good of those who love him. In regards to the end of that, a person's heart controls their life. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 4:23, King James Version. And God even talks about giving a softer heart in Ezekiel. So again, hardening Pharaoh's heart was a very big change. And then what about everyone else? How does this all fit in with the God is love, if he seems to make people as vessels fitted for destruction? Good question. But that is a topic for a different day, unfortunately. We are close to the finish for the current question, as we seem to have our answer. Do we have free will? How much does God tip the scales? What about influences not related to God, like Satan, environment, etc.? What about blindness? And when does someone not know what they're doing? Well, yes, but actually no. My conclusion is that we do indeed make our own decisions, ultimately. There are times when God directly intervenes, like in the case of Abimelech. Otherwise, I believe people are placed where they are for a reason already laid out by God in the grand scheme of things. After all, he knew how they would act/react, what their personality was, knew who they were as a person, and as such, every single decision of their life, before he placed them on this earth, hence the predestination. A good example that I'd like to finish up with is Samson. He was born with great strength, and to us reading his story, he seemed to live his life his way. Yet the entire time he brought judgment to the Philistines, as was his calling from God before he was even born. Now, I'm sure he at least knew about God throughout his lifetime. He may have even known what he was supposed to do with his life. Yet he did what he wanted till the very end. And if memory serves, that was the only time he even mentions God, is at his death. Yet after all this, he's placed in the Hall of Faith, as it's called. So yes, God does influence things, as do the other spiritual beings and environment, etc. But people ultimately decide how they go forward. There do seem to be times when someone doesn't know what they're doing, or are directly controlled demonically. So what does this mean for me, in my situation? Why is it rough even though I try? Why do I seem like a broken vessel, or one that is made for garbage? I really do want to know from God why you made me like this, full of cracks and even brokenness. And that's a great question, one that I ask myself. I don't know why, my guy. I don't know. But remember, God works all things for the good of those who love him, and that he gives us trials to refine us, even if it really hurts sometimes. And sure, we may place ourselves in trashy situations, whether after accumulation of choices or one big one, but God is a merciful God, and he will happily fix our situation. Yes, there are maybe times when he says no, but you have to remember that he made that choice after knowing how it would tie into everything. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and everything is laid bare before God. My answer to that is to pray and always cry out to God, even if you have done these things to yourself. God is merciful, and he will not abandon his children. I understand this is a very bitter answer, as that's probably what you've been doing, and I can definitely relate. It's been rough. It would be nice to know why things are or aren't happening in our specific situations, but the best we can do is our best, and the rest is up to God. After all, everything relies on faith in regards to our journey with God, which is how the elders even made it. Just like Job, Moses, Daniel, etc. We simply have to keep going and trust God has a plan, which he does. Again, as better as that is. It would be nice to have a little quest tracker that has our current objective, or when the next checkpoint is, where we have a rest area. Heck, even to see our stats would be nice. But unfortunately, things aren't that way, and most don't know what they're supposed to be doing in this life, it seems like. Especially the bros in today's day and age. To our dismay, God hasn't spoken to our parents saying, hey, your child's going to be a multimillionaire and help many people out, or your child is going to be a creative genius and tell stories that bring people to me and closer to me than they already are. It's not in plain text. Most are just doing their thing and trying to get by. I get it, but what else can one really do? Just remember, like in Job, we may not see why God makes the decisions he does or why we are in the situation we're in, because we can't see it and we don't know what's going on behind the curtains, just like we did with Job. But just like Job, we can't give up and just keep going and have faith. Have faith in God, and that he's got a plan, whatever it may be. You know, even if to us it may not make sense, we just have to keep going. But yes, we are free to make our own decisions, even if otherwise influenced. How we react is our responsibility.